Hi, I'm the man whose wife came home at 2 a.m., drunk, laughing, and proud of blowing our rent money at a club. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me I'd die alone. The next morning, she stood in court and called me the monster. And for a minute, people believed her. But then the receipts came out, and just when I thought the storm had passed, her sister showed up at my door. So tell me, how do you find peace when your life has already been burned to the ground? The house was quiet in that way it only gets when you've stayed up longer than you should. Not peaceful, just holding its breath. I was sitting at the kitchen table with one lamp on, the rest of the house dark. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:04 a.m. It blinked faintly, like it was tired too. Outside, the street was still. No cars, no wind. Just the low hum of a distant highway and the occasional click of the old ceiling fan above me. On the table sat an envelope, plain, white. The kind you don't think about until you have to. Rent. I hadn't sealed it yet. I was waiting. I told myself I was waiting because it made sense to hand it to her in the morning. The truth was simpler. I was waiting because that's what I always did. I rinsed a coffee mug I hadn't finished and set it upside down on the rack. I wiped the counter even though it was already clean. Small habits, things you do when you believe keeping order might somehow keep everything else in place. At 2:07 a.m., the front door opened. Not gently, not quietly. Her heels hit the floor first, uneven, followed by the door swinging a little too far and bouncing back against the frame. Laughter spilled in with her, loud and careless, breaking the stillness like glass. The smell came next. Perfume, sweet and sharp. Something expensive layered over smoke and sweat, and a night that had gone on far too long. She didn't see me at first. She dropped her purse on the chair, missed, and it hit the floor. She kicked it aside with her foot. "Oh," she said when she finally noticed me. "You're still up." Her voice was light, almost amused, like I was the odd one for being awake. I didn't answer right away. I watched her sway slightly as she took off her jacket and tossed it over the back of the couch. She looked energized, not tired. Alive in a way she never seemed to be at home. "You've been out late," I said. It came out even. Calm. She shrugged. Time got away from me. I glanced at the clock again, then back at her. "It's after 2. She laughed, waving a hand like that detail didn't matter. "Relax. You always make everything sound so dramatic." I stood and slid the envelope a few inches closer to her across the table. I didn't push it. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked one question. The kind of question someone responsible asks. "Did you use the rent money?" She didn't answer right away. She leaned against the counter and kicked off her shoes. One landed near the door. The other tipped over by the fridge. Then she smiled. Not apologetic. Not embarrassed. "Yeah," she said. "So?" The words settled heavy in my chest. "So," I repeated quietly. "That was due tomorrow." She rolled her eyes and reached for a glass, filling it with water she didn't drink. "I needed a night out. You wouldn't understand." I looked at the envelope, then at her. "That wasn't extra money." She picked up the envelope, glanced inside, then set it down like it was a receipt she didn't need. "You'll figure it out. You always do." That's when she laughed. Not loud, not cruel in an obvious way, just casual, like what she was about to say didn't matter. "You know," she said, taking a step closer, "you're going to end up alone if you keep being like this." The words weren't sharp. That was the worst part. They were easy, practiced. Something went quiet inside me. Not the house. Me. I felt heat spread through my chest, then nothing at all. Like a switch flipped. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. My body stayed still while my thoughts scattered. She turned away before I could say anything, already done with the conversation. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Try not to overthink everything for once." Her bedroom door closed a moment later. Not slammed, just shut. I stayed where I was. The clock changed to 2:11 a.m. I sat back down and looked at the envelope again, at my name written neatly on the front, at how small it suddenly felt. This wasn't about money. I knew that now. It was about how easily I'd been pushed aside, how quiet I'd learned to become, how long I'd mistaken patience for strength. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't the end of my marriage. It was the first time I finally saw it clearly. I didn't sleep. I lay there until the gray edge of morning slipped through the blinds, listening to the house settle around me. The bedroom door never opened. No apology followed. No explanation drifted down the hallway. When my alarm finally went off, it felt unnecessary, like my body had already been awake for hours. I showered, dressed, and moved through the routine on instinct. Buttoned shirt, clean jacket, shoes by the door. I gathered the folder from the desk where I'd placed it the night before. Everything inside was neat, ordered. Bank statements, payment confirmations, receipts tucked into clear sleeves. I didn't linger on them. I just checked that they were there. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. Morning traffic had begun to build, but no one honked. No one rushed. I parked, sat for a moment with the engine off, and took a slow breath before stepping out. My shoulders felt tight, like I'd been carrying something heavy too long and hadn't set it down yet. Inside, the building smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. Voices echoed in short bursts, then disappeared down hallways. I took a seat on one of the wooden benches and rested the folder on my lap. My hands stayed still, though my pulse didn't. I told myself to stay focused. This was a process. Nothing personal, just facts. She arrived 10 minutes later. I recognized her before she saw me. Her hair was styled carefully, makeup just enough to look effortless. She wore a fitted jacket I'd never seen before and walked with purpose, heels clicking in a steady rhythm. When she smiled at the clerk, it was warm, practiced, the kind of smile that made people feel comfortable instantly. She laughed softly at something the clerk said, touched his arm briefly, thanked him like she meant it. I watched from my bench and felt something settle in my stomach. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't someone bracing for impact. This was performance. When she finally looked my way, her smile didn't fade. It shifted, polite, controlled, like we were distant acquaintances who'd once shared a story that no longer mattered. The hearing moved quickly at first. Names, dates, procedures. I answered when asked, kept my voice level. When it was her turn, she leaned forward slightly, hands folded, expression calm. She spoke about how hard things had been, about how isolated she'd felt, about how controlling I was with money, how distant I'd become, how she'd felt watched rather than supported. She said it gently, like she was explaining something reasonable. I wanted to speak. The words lined up fast in my head. Corrections, context, truth. I didn't say anything. I stayed still and felt that familiar freeze settle over me. The room seemed smaller. I noticed people glancing in my direction, then back at her. I wondered what they saw when they looked at me. The quiet husband. The man who didn't object. The judge nodded, listening. Notes were taken. By the time the paperwork was finalized, she looked relieved. Not sad, not reflective, relieved. As if something inconvenient had been crossed off a list. Outside the courtroom, she stood with her attorney and smiled again, lighter this time. She thanked him, shook his hand, and laughed once more. It was the sound of someone who believed she'd come out ahead. I stepped aside as they passed. She didn't look back. I stayed where I was, watching her walk down the hallway with confidence, already moving on. The folder felt heavier in my grip than it had earlier. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake by staying quiet. If silence had only helped her rewrite everything. Then I remembered the look on her face. The certainty. She thought this was finished. What she didn't realize was that silence isn't the same as surrender. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the late afternoon sun had stretched long shadows across the lawn. The house looked the same, quiet, ordinary, but something about it felt different. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, watching dust float in the amber light through the windshield. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything. When I finally stepped inside, the air was still. The silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that settled after a fire, everything intact, but changed. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, hands still on the knob. The same furniture, the same framed pictures. Nothing had moved. And yet, it didn't feel like my home anymore. Or maybe it never really had. I tossed my keys in the bowl by the door and walked into the kitchen. The same stack of mail sat on the counter. I hadn't touched it in days. An old coupon flyer had started to curl at the corners. I opened the fridge, stared at the shelves, then closed it again. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I walked into the living room, where the coffee table still had that coffee-stained coaster she always ignored. My folder was on the armrest of the couch, documents from court, perfectly stacked. I sat down slowly, like the cushions might push me away. I opened the folder, flipped through the pages once without really seeing them, and then closed it again. It wasn't over, but it had shifted. I leaned back and looked around. A receipt peeked out from between the couch cushions. I pulled it out. A gas station. 6 months ago. Her name, her card, candy bars, and a mini bottle of whiskey. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. That was always the thing. The small moments. The things that didn't seem like much until they stacked high enough to block the light. I found a sticky note on the fridge, my handwriting. Pick up dry cleaning. Tuesday. That Tuesday had been 3 weeks ago. She never picked it up. I had. Just like I'd refilled her prescription, rescheduled her dentist appointment, paid the late utility bills she'd forgotten, or claimed she had. It hit me like a slow tide. I'd been managing not just the house, but her chaos. And I told myself that was love. I sat with that thought for a while, staring at the note. Not angry, not even bitter, just tired. Tired in the bones kind of way. There had been so many little pieces over the years, so many things I let slide because I didn't want the fight. Or worse, because I thought if I fixed it quietly, she'd see it as love too. But she hadn't. She saw it as expected. I wasn't unlucky, I muttered out loud, surprising myself. I was predictable. That realization sat heavy. I'd worn my silence like armor. I thought if I didn't argue, I'd be the better man. But all it had done was give her space to rewrite the truth, and I'd helped her do it. I used to think staying quiet meant I was strong enough to carry it. That eventually someone would notice and give me credit for the weight. But no one ever does. They just assume you're fine. Or worse, they believe the person who talks louder. I looked around the room again. There were people I didn't hear from anymore. Friends I'd stopped calling back because it was easier than explaining why we never came to dinner or why she didn't want to see them. I hadn't even noticed how far I'd pulled away until now. And it wasn't just them. It was me, too. I used to read. I used to cook. I used to talk about movies and books like they mattered. Now I could barely remember the last thing I cared enough about to recommend. That wasn't just marriage. That was erasure. And it happened one silence at a time. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I just sat there, realizing how far I'd let things drift without anchoring myself to anything solid. And yet, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to stand in front of a crowd and lay out her faults like evidence. That wasn't who I was. It never had been. But I did want something different now. Clarity. Precision. I didn't need to be louder. I needed to be exact. That meant not reacting just to hurt back. It meant being deliberate. So I stood up, took the folder, and walked to the kitchen table. I opened it again, this time, not just to check what was inside, but to prepare. I removed the receipts and set them aside, not to use right now, but to know where they were. To remind myself that the truth didn't disappear just because it hadn't been shouted. The weight wasn't gone, but it had shifted. I wasn't carrying it for her anymore. I closed the folder and looked out the window. The sun had dipped below the trees now, turning the sky pale gold. The street was quiet, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a pause, like something waiting. I didn't know when I would speak, but for the first time, I knew exactly what I would say. I left the folder on the table, still closed, still waiting. My fingers hovered over it for a second longer before I grabbed the grocery list I'd written earlier that morning. Eggs, coffee, trash bags, paper towels, and headed out. The sun hadn't started to set yet. The neighborhood felt like any other quiet Texas suburb on a Thursday. Lawns were trimmed. A kid rode by on a scooter, his mother calling after him to slow down. Everything looked the same. Familiar, almost comforting, in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. The grocery store wasn't busy. A few folks nodded politely, and I nodded back. I moved through the aisles slow and steady, picked up the things I needed, let the ordinary rhythm of it all soften the tension that had wrapped itself around my spine since court. At checkout, I made small talk with the older woman ringing me up. She asked if I wanted paper or plastic. I said paper, out of habit. She smiled like she didn't need to know anything else about me. And in that moment, I wanted to be just another man buying eggs. Back in the parking lot, I set the bags on the passenger seat and leaned against the car for a second. The wind was picking up. Warm, dry. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Her name lit up the screen. It rang once before I answered. Hello? There was a pause. Then her voice, light, relaxed, like we hadn't spent the day before in court. Hey, just checking in. That tone, like she was calling an old friend, like none of it had ever mattered. No shame, no pause, no acknowledgement. Didn't think I'd hear from you, I said, keeping my voice flat. She laughed. Well, you know, things got a little heated yesterday, but it's all behind us now, right? Clean slate. Clean slate. Like she hadn't stood in front of a judge and told strangers I'd controlled her, isolated her, crushed her dreams. Like she hadn't looked pleased when they believed her. I didn't respond right away, just stared out at the parking lot. At a woman wrangling two toddlers into a minivan while my ex-wife kept talking like she was placing a brunch order. She went on, something about how she was thinking of moving into that apartment off Henderson, how the landlord seemed nice, how she might start yoga again. And then, as casually as someone mentioning the weather, she said, "And just so you know, I told my sister not to worry about dropping off that old box. I'll come by and grab it myself sometime." She thought she could still walk in and out of my space like before. Just shift a few pieces around. Smile, flatter, manipulate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sigh. I waited until she stopped talking. Then I said, "You can't come here anymore." Silence on the line. I let it settle before I continued. "We're done. That includes the part where you keep trying to shape how people see me. You made choices. I didn't stop you, but if you keep rewriting what happened, I'll respond. Not with noise, with proof." Another pause. Then a short, breathy laugh. "Oh, come on. What proof? Those little receipts you keep collecting? You think people care about that?" Her voice had that edge again. That amused condescension she always slipped into when she thought I was bluffing. "You're not the type. You're too decent to get your hands dirty." I didn't take the bait. I simply said, "This is your chance to stop." She exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between a scoff and disbelief. "You're serious?" "I am." A longer silence this time, and then, with that same smirk in her voice, she said, "You always were good at playing the martyr." "Fine, whatever. I've got other things to worry about." She hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, then dropped it in the cup holder. The wind had picked up again. I stood there a while longer, feeling the shift in my chest, not rage, not fear, just a clean line drawn. She hadn't heard the warning. She'd heard what she wanted to hear. I drove home slowly. The bags rustled in the seat beside me. At a red light, I thought about how easy it would have been to just let it go, to keep quiet, avoid the hassle. But I knew better now. Silence wasn't peace. It was permission. Back at the house, I unpacked the groceries like nothing had happened, set the eggs in the fridge, pulled the coffee out of the bag. The clock over the stove ticked like always, but the air was different, settled. I didn't feel lighter. I felt firmer. That warning wasn't for her benefit, it was for mine. A line I had to say out loud so I'd remember where I stood if she tried to blur it later. I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the folder again. Next time wouldn't be a phone call. Next time, it wouldn't be words. I gave her the chance to stop. What she did next told me exactly who she thought I was. The morning after that call, the house was still, but something had shifted. Not in the air, more in the way I moved through it. Every sound felt sharper. The creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge. Even the way the coffee brewed seemed louder than usual. I checked my phone. No messages. Not from her. Not from mutual friends. I wasn't expecting any, not really, but still. I noticed. That silence had a different tone now. Before, it was the kind of quiet that came from retreat. From staying small so you didn't make waves. Now it felt more like isolation with a spotlight overhead. People were choosing sides or choosing to back away altogether. Around noon, I went for a drive. Not anywhere important, just looping roads, gas stations, the strip mall near I-35. Somewhere between the dry cleaner and the hardware store, my phone buzzed. It wasn't her, it was Scott. I hadn't talked to him since the court date. We used to grab lunch once a week. Same booth, same waitress. I picked up. His tone was careful, polite in a way that meant something was coming. "Hey," he said. "Quick question. Did you really put tracking apps on her phone?" I didn't respond right away. My hand tightened on the wheel. Someone mentioned it. He added, "Not sure who started it, but it's, you know, making the rounds." My first instinct was to laugh because it was ridiculous, but I didn't, because it wasn't meant to be funny. It was strategic, quiet, planted, like a weed in a neighbor's yard that suddenly creeps under your fence. I told Scott the truth, plain and clear. No drama, no defenses. He said, "Yeah, I figured. Just wanted to hear it from you." But the tone had shifted. Just a hair. Enough for me to hear the beginning of a wedge. I hung up, pulled over, and sat there staring at the dashboard. That kind of lie spreads faster than truth because it comes with a built-in story, one that fits whatever picture she wants people to see. And I knew that picture. She'd painted it before, soft brushstrokes of victimhood, framed by my silence. All of a sudden, I felt like the one on trial again. Back at the house, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway, engine off, window cracked, and let the weight settle. I started thinking dangerous thoughts. Maybe I should just let it all go. Let her have the narrative. Let the receipts stay in that folder forever. Let her tell whoever she wanted that I was the bad guy, overbearing, obsessive, jealous. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe I was holding on to dignity in a world that didn't care for it anymore. I walked inside, set the keys down, and stared at the folder still sitting on the kitchen table. I reached for it, then pulled my hand back. There was a strange relief in the thought of disappearing from the whole thing. No more explaining. No more checking my name in people's voices. Just silence. I stood there a long time. Maybe peace costs you your name. Maybe that's the price of walking away. That evening, I was outside trimming the hedge. Not because it needed it. Just to keep my hands busy. Across the street, I saw Rachel, my neighbor's daughter, standing by their porch steps, phone in hand, tears running down her cheek. Her dad walked past her, straight into the house, without even glancing her way. She called after him once, soft, broken. He didn't turn around. I don't know what they were fighting about. Maybe it was something small. But the way she crumbled into herself hit something in me. Not the drama of it, the familiarity. I'd been that voice, quiet, trying to matter. And he'd been that back, walking away like nothing had been said. It clicked, painfully and clearly. Walking away doesn't end the cycle. It hands it off to the next person. I walked back inside. The folder was still there. Same spot. But something was different now. I didn't open it. I didn't write anything new. But I didn't put it away either. I left it out where I could see it. Because I wasn't done. I wasn't going to vanish. Not this time. Because I didn't know how I'd respond, but I knew I wasn't going to vanish anymore. That decision settled into me like concrete drying in slow layers. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. It was late, somewhere past 10. The house was still, just the hum of the ceiling fan above and the occasional creak of the old vents cycling air. I stood in the hallway, hand resting on the door frame of the room I hadn't entered with real intention in a long while. My home office wasn't much. One desk, a dented filing cabinet, a printer that only worked if you whispered kindly to it. But that night, it became something else. Not a place to escape, but a place to prepare. I flipped on the light. The bulb above flickered once, then steadied. I pulled out the chair, sat down, and opened the folder that had been moved from room to room like a shadow I wasn't ready to confront. This time, I didn't hesitate. I spread everything out on the table. Receipts, screenshots, emails, bank statements. I powered on the laptop. It whirred like it hadn't been used in weeks. Maybe it hadn't. What hit me hardest wasn't the content, but the realization that everything I needed was already there. There were no dramatic holes to fill, no story to invent, just a timeline that told itself, clean, time-stamped, and without commentary. There was the receipt from the club at 2:13 a.m., her signature scribbled at the bottom. There were the transactions from our joint account, pulled the same night. Not one, several, Ubers, liquor stores, a boutique, all lined up like dominoes. I didn't feel angry. Not now. What I felt was clarity. A slow, exacting kind that made my movements quieter and my thoughts sharper. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting her back. It was about reclaiming what I'd let get rewritten too many times. The truth. At some point, I reached for my phone. I opened social media. My thumb hovered over the new post box, and then I locked the screen and set it face down. That wasn't the room where this story belonged. No group message, no passive-aggressive status, no quote about karma. Just the facts. They belonged in spaces that had weight, rooms with doors and chairs and people who took notes. If this went back to court, I'd be ready. If it didn't, I'd still have my name intact. I poured myself a glass of water and returned to the table. Then the second shift came. An email. No greeting, no context. Just a PDF attached and one line in the body. You'll want to see this. It was from her attorney's office. I clicked. Inside was a subtle accusation, worded carefully. Nothing direct, just enough to raise a question. It suggested I'd misused joint funds. No proof, no specifics, just doubt designed to linger. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I opened another folder, one I'd already labeled. August statements? The answer was already there. She hadn't realized it yet, but every lie she whispered only pulled the noose tighter, not around my name, but around her own consistency. And the louder she got, the easier it was to measure. People think rage is what gives you power in conflict, but no. Power is patience. It's letting noise echo while your facts line up in straight rows. That night, I didn't send anything. I didn't call anyone. I didn't rush to defend myself. I simply labeled, sorted, time-stamped, printed, and filed. One stack after another. No commentary. No headline. By the time midnight rolled around, the entire narrative sat in 3 neat binders on the table. Each one marked, each one silent, but not empty. Receipts don't raise their voice. They don't argue. They wait. And that's what I planned to do. I didn't need to interrupt her story. I was going to end it. That thought stayed with me as I pulled into the courthouse parking lot a week later. It was a follow-up hearing, procedural stuff mostly, but the energy around it felt different, tighter, like everyone could sense something shifting, even if no one could name it yet. I parked under a dying oak tree, its brittle limbs scratching at the sky like it had something to say, but forgot how. I sat there for a moment, engine off, radio silent. The quiet didn't bother me anymore. It had become something else, a signal, not a symptom. The walk up to the courthouse steps felt deliberate, grounded. I wasn't rushing, wasn't hiding, just moving forward, exactly at my pace. Over the past few days, something had changed, not just in me, but in the air between us. Her silence had cracked first. It started with a text, short and seemingly harmless. Just checking in, hope things are calming down. I didn't answer. Then came a message through a mutual friend. She said she's worried about you. Thought maybe you were having a hard time letting go. That one made me pause. Letting go? I hadn't replied to a single jab, hadn't posted a word, hadn't corrected anyone. I had only stepped away from the noise and into the facts. That, apparently, was unsettling enough. 2 nights ago, she called. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail that sounded sweet on the surface, but I knew better than to trust the frosting. Hey, I know things got messy. I hope we can both move on peacefully. You know, without dragging each other through the mud. For the kids. For the sake of closure. No kids, no dragging. But that line, without dragging each other through the mud, that was the tell. She was worried, not about me, about what I had. I responded finally, the next morning. Brief, polite. Appreciate your message. Let's keep future communication through attorneys. Wishing you well. I didn't ask how she was, didn't bite, didn't open a window. She didn't reply after that. But by then, I could feel it. She was circling, tapping the ground, trying to hear if anything underneath was about to explode. Inside the courthouse hallway, the buzz was different from last week. People greeted me with small nods but didn't linger. The woman at the front desk smiled too tightly. A clerk I didn't recognize handed me a paper, then immediately turned away to answer a phone that wasn't ringing. I knew that dance. I'd seen it before. The shift in tone when someone you thought was easy suddenly stopped playing the role. That morning, I'd received another legal notice. This one wasn't from the court. It was a formal clarification request from her attorney sent directly to my lawyer. It claimed I had withheld shared financial assets. It suggested I might have misrepresented the account balances during the settlement. It used careful language, avoiding direct accusation, but not by much. My lawyer, to his credit, wasn't rattled. "This won't stick," he'd said over the phone. "It's a fishing expedition. They're trying to see if you'll panic." I didn't, because every transfer, every dollar, every bill payment, I had it logged, not just the receipts, but the context around them. Dated, categorized, clear. What struck me wasn't the accusation itself, it was how desperate it was. She was betting on me reacting like the old version of myself, the one who would try to explain, justify, calm things down. But I wasn't playing that role anymore. Later that afternoon, as I waited for a document review, I stood by the window in the legal office lobby. The sun was low, casting long streaks of gold across the tiled floor. Her sister's voice popped into my head, not from a recent call, but from weeks earlier, when she had come by unexpectedly. "You were never loud. That's what made her underestimate you." At the time, I didn't know what to make of that. Now I understood exactly what she meant. The next message from my ex didn't come in words. It came through action. A second filing, this time implying that I had delayed financial disclosures on purpose. My lawyer called it a bluff with paperwork. But what she didn't realize was that the contradiction was now on record. 2 filings, one suggesting I misrepresented funds, and another stating I'd fully disclosed everything, both under her name, both within 48 hours. I printed them, marked them, filed them, didn't say a word. That night, back home, I sat at the same table where I'd once tried to budget around bounced checks and surprise overdraft fees she'd never owned up to. The room was still. No music, just the shuffle of paper. I knew I could respond now, release everything, clarify every rumor, send one email and shift the weight of public opinion. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the timing mattered more than the satisfaction, and I wasn't looking for victory. I was waiting for clarity. She thought silence was retreat. She didn't know silence could be a countdown. The following morning, I got the notice. There'd be a formal inquiry, One more hearing, scheduled for the following week. It wasn't initiated by me, but I knew exactly why it was happening. Someone had flagged inconsistencies in her filings, not just one, multiple. Suddenly, my name was no longer the one under question. She didn't know that yet, but she would. As I folded the letter and slid it into my folder, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was anticipation. Measured, patient, the same way you feel when you've told the truth, backed it up, and walked away. Not to disappear, but to watch what comes next. She thought this was the moment she'd finish me. She didn't know it was the moment everything would surface. The courthouse hallway felt colder than usual, even though the December sun had already warmed up most of the town. Maybe it wasn't the weather. Maybe it was the weight of everything that had led to this moment. I stepped through the security check, my folder tucked under one arm. Inside it, nothing flashy, just facts, statements, receipts. The kind that don't raise their voice, but settle arguments like a gavel to wood. Outside courtroom 2B, I saw her. She stood talking to her attorney, arms crossed like always when she was about to perform. Her heels clicked nervously when she shifted weight, but her face stayed calm, overly calm. That "I've already won" expression I used to mistake for confidence. I don't mistake it anymore. When her eyes met mine, she smiled, polite, polished, but her shoulders didn't relax. I nodded. No smile, no performance. The courtroom was nearly empty except for us, the judge, clerks, and a man in a gray suit who'd been assigned to document the financial review. I took my seat. She adjusted her scarf, leaned toward her lawyer, whispered something, probably rehearsing the version she'd curated. Again. The judge greeted us, shuffled through some papers, then went straight into the hearing. Her side spoke first. Same script, different tone. Your Honor, my client is concerned that there were gaps in the initial financial disclosures. It appears certain shared funds were rerouted prior to separation. Emotional distress, financial strain. I didn't flinch, because I wasn't here to defend my feelings. That part of me wasn't on trial anymore. When the judge turned to me, there was no preamble. Mr. R., do you have documents prepared regarding these transactions? I nodded once, opened my folder, and handed over the copies. Chronological, itemized, accompanied by bank statements and receipt images. The bailiff delivered them across. No speeches, no rebuttals, no emotion. Just the quiet weight of ink on paper. For a moment, the courtroom was still. Not frozen, listening. As the judge flipped pages, something shifted. Her attorney leaned forward. She didn't. She stayed still, but not the calm kind, the calculating kind, the "I hope they don't see what I see" kind. The judge adjusted her glasses, then looked up. These transactions, they include both your names, Ms. R., and the dates align with deposits you previously denied existed. Silence, not just between us. In the whole room. Then, slowly, her lips parted. I didn't see those before. Maybe I misunderstood the question at the time. Her voice wasn't as steady as it used to be. The judge continued. There also appeared to be recurring charges tied to an entertainment venue, one you claimed Mr. R. had frequented. But the timestamps place you there. Multiple times. Without him. She blinked, said nothing. The judge wasn't angry. She didn't need to be, because the truth was no longer hiding. It was printed, highlighted, and organized. I didn't gloat, didn't even look in her direction. I kept my hands folded and my eyes on the desk in front of me, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being heard without raising my voice. The judge closed the folder and placed it gently on her bench. Based on the evidence presented today and the inconsistencies between prior claims and the submitted documentation, I see no basis for further dispute. This review is concluded. All existing settlements will stand. Just like that, it was done. Not with a bang, with clarity. Outside the courtroom, I walked slowly, not from fatigue, but from release, like something heavy had finally slid off my back without me even noticing it had been there that long. She didn't follow me, didn't say a word. Maybe she'd planned a dramatic moment in the hallway, a final accusation, a spin on the outcome. But there was no script for this part. No lines left to say when the facts have spoken. As I reached the parking lot, I passed by the bench where I'd once sat trying to count rent money that didn't add up. She'd spent it that weekend, came home late, tossed her heels on the floor, and told me I'd die alone. Back then, I believed parts of that. Now I understood what she was really saying that night, that I wouldn't survive without her chaos. She was wrong. Later that evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, folders now back in the drawer, untouched, I glanced at a plain white envelope tucked behind a salt shaker. Rent. Paid on time. In full. By me. I smiled, just slightly, not because of what I proved today, but because of what I no longer had to prove to anyone. I thought that was the end until 2 days later, someone knocked on my door. I heard the knock right as the light began to shift through the kitchen blinds. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't timid either. Just steady. I set down the coffee mug in my hand, half empty, still warm, and walked toward the front door. My feet didn't hurry. I wasn't expecting anyone. No packages, no appointments. And to be honest, I thought I was done with surprises for a while. But when I opened it, there she was, my ex-wife's sister, Amanda. She stood on the porch in jeans and a gray sweater, hair pulled back like she hadn't decided whether she was staying long. Her eyes searched mine, looking not for a fight, but for permission. "Hey," she said, "do you have a minute?" I nodded once and stepped aside. The house was cleaner than usual. I'd kept myself busy since the ruling, wiping counters that didn't need it, rearranging the mail tray, even vacuuming under the sofa. But not out of nerves, just habit-filling space. That's what happens when noise disappears. Amanda sat at the edge of the couch, hands folded tight in her lap. I didn't ask what she wanted. I figured if she'd come all the way here, she'd find the words herself. She looked around the room for a second, like something about the stillness caught her off guard. Then finally, she looked back at me. "I saw the hearing transcript," she began. "I asked a friend in the clerk's office." I just nodded. Let her continue. "I didn't come here to apologize on her behalf," she said. "That's not mine to give. And I know I haven't been around much. But I just..." She paused, took a breath that trembled a little at the end. "I believed her," she said, eyes lowering. "At first, I really did. And even when things didn't add up, I kept thinking maybe it was just complicated. Maybe the truth was somewhere in the middle. But after reading everything, seeing the dates, the amounts, the way you handled it..." Her voice softened. "You didn't try to destroy her. You just refused to disappear." For a long beat, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't need to fill the silence. Instead, I got up, walked into the kitchen, and came back with 2 mugs of coffee. No sugar, no cream. I didn't ask how she took it. She accepted it with both hands like she wasn't expecting kindness. I didn't offer kindness. I offered normal. "I know it doesn't change anything," Amanda said after a sip, "but I needed to say it, out loud, to you." "I appreciate that," I said. She nodded. "You probably hate her." I shook my head. "No. Hating her would mean she still gets to take space in here," I said, tapping 2 fingers gently against my chest. "She doesn't. Not anymore." Amanda didn't cry. She didn't cling or confess. She just sat there, breathing in a little slower now, like even she didn't realize how much tension she'd been holding. Outside, the sun had dipped below the rooftops. The late afternoon light slanted through the windows, warming the hardwood floors. We talked for another few minutes, about nothing important. Work, her nephew, whether the barbecue joint off I-30 was still open. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't closure. It was just 2 people sitting with truth between them, not needing to dress it up. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "I'm glad you're okay," she said. I gave a half smile. "I'm not okay, but I'm better." That seemed to land with her. She stepped out, paused, then turned back. "If you ever want company, not to talk about her, just company, let me know." I nodded again. Not yes, not no, just acknowledgement. She understood. Then she walked down the steps, back to her car, and I closed the door behind her. Later that night, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the coffee table. That envelope, the rent one, was still there. I don't even remember leaving it out. I'd been meaning to shred it or toss it or do anything except keep looking at it. But tonight, it looked different. Not like a scar. Not even like a memory. More like a mile marker. That envelope used to mean failure to me. A reminder of everything I'd let slide, of how far I'd bent to keep peace that wasn't real. But now, it was just paper. A leftover from a version of me that didn't know better yet. I picked it up and folded it in half. Then in half again. Not with anger. Just care. Then I slid it into a drawer, shut it softly, and walked to the back porch. The sun had long set, but the breeze was still warm. Crickets had taken over the soundscape. That, and the creak of my old rocking chair as I sat with a fresh cup in hand. I didn't turn on music, didn't check my phone, didn't think about tomorrow. I just breathed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head. I wasn't preparing for the next fire to put out. I wasn't shrinking myself to avoid conflict or puffing up to win some moral debate. I was just there. Me, whole, no applause, no audience, no punishment. And that was the win. I'd lost a lot over the past year. A title, a marriage. Some illusions I'd carried too long, but I'd also gained something. Something that didn't come in a settlement or get stamped by a judge. I'd earned back my name. I'd reclaimed my voice. And I'd found a quiet I didn't have to fear anymore. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like mine.